Hi, this is about the first sunny day for a week and the first or second day that it hasn't rained, and this is also one of my favourite spots in Oxford. I'm just short of the Four Rivers or Four Streams water junction. This bit of river runs alongside the road on the right, and at the end there's a footbridge, a humped footbridge that you might just be able to see a little bit of up ahead. And I'm going to walk there now, and then I'm going to read from Alice in Wonderland. I read the first 6 chapters last year, and somebody has asked me to restart as a bonus. At the beginning of the month, I showed Alice Day, which wasn't quite as spectacular as last year because the Story Museum, who organise it, didn't use the Alice puppet. It was on a trip to Amsterdam, apparently, but it was still a very interesting day with several demonstrations that weren't anything to do with Alice. Morris dancers and an assortment of other things. And that's Oxford's sort of official Alice event for the year, though the old sheep shop, which is the Alice shop, continues to run all year round. But there's no reason why I shouldn't celebrate Alice unofficially by giving some more readings, and that's what I'm going to start again now. It's slightly breezy, not bitingly so, and the sun is really quite warm on my head, and I think the best description is balmy. Sort of comfortably warm and a little bit windy, but not in any way such as to be annoying. So here I am. That's the Bull Stake stream, which used to be the main branch of the Thames, going off to the left. This is the Thames going in that direction and that direction, ahead and behind, and this is Sheepwash Channel. And there continue to be stupid and very slow amounts of construction work here. One thing I mentioned about 14 months ago, I think, end of May, was that the nursery had been or was in the process of being demolished, and you can see that that's entirely gone behind the Kia hoarding. The seat is still here, and it is really nice in this sort of weather just to sit down here and look over the river. Like that. I did a spring walk video in the spring, not surprisingly, I think it was March, about looking for fritillaries in Iffley Meadow. and I did a secret cafes video about Jericho coffee traders where I started from here. In the Fritillaries video I talked about how, I mentioned very briefly at the end, how the streams of Oxford that you find so many of round here have shaped the western part of the city. And I think that bridge and this water junction should be adopted as a symbol of that.
Huge.
And before starting Alice, I'm just going to walk up here a little bit to try to get a nice view of the bridge. Too close. That's not bad, probably still too close. In fact, I think the best view that I got was when I was under this horrible bridge, which I really don't like doing, because I'm never quite convinced that it's strong enough to support the trains, and it's full of pigeon droppings and stuff. So that is about the shape that I want, but I think I want morning light on it rather than afternoon light to give the right tones. But the boat there is a bonus. And I think that is very pretty. It's even beautiful, and it should be adopted. It should be adopted as an icon, a symbol of this part of Oxford. Forget Magdalen College. This is better. And I have to say, right now, with the sun so warm and so much light, this is pretty close to the dictionary definition of idyllic. So let's cut for a moment and I'll find my Alice. Okay, well, I left Alice on the last day for which I could find nice, bright, sunny reading weather. And since I'd stocked up on a few Alice videos previously and kept them in reserve, I think I managed to keep going until last November. But anyway, I left Alice at the end of chapter 6 in Alice in Wonderland, a chapter called Pig and Pepper. And she had visited the Duchess's chaotic household, and she had met a violent cook who was throwing crockery and utensils everywhere, a baby that was constantly sneezing, and the Cheshire cat in the woods just after she leaves the kitchen. And Alice asks the cat where she ought to go. And the cat says, go to either the Mad Hatter's house or the March Hare's house. They're both mad, so it doesn't matter much. Alice decides to go to the March Hare because perhaps it won't be so mad now that it's May. Evidently that bit of the story is set in May. And she comes in sight of the house, and it's fairly obvious that it's the March Hare's because the chimney is shaped like ears and the roof is thatched with fur. So let's now begin chapter 7, A Mad Tea Party. There was a table set out under a tree in front of the house. That's the March Hare's house that Alice has approached. There was a table set out under a tree in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea at it. A dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion, resting their elbows on it and talking over its head. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice. Only, as it's asleep, I suppose it doesn't mind. The table was a large one, but the three were all crowded together at one corner of it. "No room! No room!" they cried out when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," said Alice indignantly, and she sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. "Have some wine," the March Hare said in an encouraging tone. Alice looked all round the table, but there was nothing on it but tea. "I don't see any wine," she remarked. "There isn't any," said the March Hare. "Then it wasn't very civil of you to offer it," said Alice angrily. "It wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited," said the March Hare. "I didn't know it was your table," said Alice. "It's laid for a great many more than 3. "Your hair wants cutting," said the Hatter. He had been looking at Alice for some time with great curiosity, and this was his first speech. "You should learn not to make personal remarks," Alice said with some severity. "It's very rude." The Hatter opened his eyes very wide on hearing this, but all he said was, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" "Come, we shall have some fun now," thought Alice. "I'm glad they've begun asking riddles. I believe I can guess that," she added aloud. "Do you mean that you think you can find out the answer to it?" said the March Hare. "Exactly so," said Alice. "Then you should say what you mean," the March Hare went on. "I do," Alice hastily replied. At least I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know." "Not the same thing a bit," said the Hatter. "You might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I see." "You might just as well say," added the March Hare, "that I like what I get is the same thing as I get what I like." "You might just as well say," added the Dormouse, who seemed to be talking in his sleep, "that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe." "It is the same thing with you," said the Hatter. And here the conversation dropped, and the party sat silent for a minute, while Alice thought over all she could remember about ravens and writing desks, which wasn't very much. The Hatter was the first to break the silence. "Which day of the month is it?" he said, turning to Alice. He had taken his watch out of his pocket and was looking at it uneasily, shaking it every now and then and holding it to his ear. Alice considered a little and then said, "The 4th. "2 days wrong," sighed the Hatter. "I told you butter wouldn't suit the works," he added, looking angrily at the March Hare. "It was the best butter," the March Hare meekly replied. "Yes, but some crumbs must have got in as well," the Hatter grumbled. You shouldn't have put it in with the bread knife. The March Hare took the watch and looked at it gloomily. Then he dipped it into his cup of tea and looked at it again. But he could think of nothing better to say than his first remark. It was the best butter, you know. Alice had been looking over his shoulder with some curiosity. What a funny watch, she remarked. It tells the day of the month and doesn't tell what o'clock it is. Why should it, muttered the Hatter. Does your watch tell you what year it is? Of course not, Alice replied very readily. But that's because it stays the same year for such a long time together. Which is just the same case with mine, said the Hatter. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remark seemed to have no sort of meaning in it, and yet it was certainly English. I don't quite understand you, she said, as politely as she could. The Dormouse is asleep again, said the Hatter, and he poured a little hot tea upon its nose. The Dormouse shook its head impatiently and said, without opening its eyes, of course, just what I was going to remark myself. Have you guessed the riddle yet? The Hatter said, turning to Alice again. No, I give it up, Alice replied. What's the answer? I haven't the slightest idea, said the Hatter. Nor I, said the March Hare. Alice sighed wearily. I think you might do something better with the time, she said, than waste it in asking riddles that have no answers. If you knew time as well as I do, said the Hatter, you wouldn't talk about wasting it. It's him. I don't know what you mean, said Alice. Of course you don't, the Hatter said, tossing his head contemptuously. I dare say you never even spoke to time. Perhaps not, Alice cautiously replied. But I know I have to beat time when I learn music. Ah, that accounts for it, said the Hatter. He won't stand beating. Now, if you only kept on good terms with him, he'd do almost anything you liked with the clock. For instance, suppose it were 9 o'clock in the morning, just time to begin lessons. You'd only have to whisper a hint to time, and round goes the clock in a twinkling. 1:30, time for dinner. I only wish it was, the March Hare said to itself in a whisper. That would be grand, certainly, said Alice thoughtfully. But then, I shouldn't be hungry for it, you know. Not at first, perhaps, said the Hatter, but you could keep it to 1:30 as long as you liked. Is that the way you manage? Alice asked. The Hatter shook his head mournfully. Not I, he replied. We quarrelled last March, just before he went mad, you know, pointing with his teaspoon at the March Hare. It was at the great concert given by the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing. Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder what you're at. You know the song, perhaps? I've heard something like it, said Alice. It goes on, you know, the Hatter continued, in this way. Up above the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle. Here the Dormouse shook itself and began singing in its sleep. Twinkle, 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 and went on so long that they had to pinch it to make it stop. Well, I'd hardly finished the first verse, said the Hatter, when the Queen jumped up and bawled out, He's murdering the time. Off with his head. How dreadfully savage, exclaimed Alice. And ever since that, the Hatter said in a mournful tone, he won't do a thing I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now. OK, well, in a perpetual 6 o'clock, that's the first half of Chapter 7 of Alice in Wonderland, the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. See you in a bit for the second half.